Hi, my name is Chelsea Tanner, and I'm head of the Flute platform at Tonebase. Creating a resonant, full, and clear sound is one of the biggest challenges that we face as flutists. If we don't have a beautiful sound, there's no amount of technical prowess or facility that will make up for it. In this video, 4 esteemed tone-based artists explore airflow on their instruments. They are Marianne Gedigian, Mark Sparks, Alexis Still, and Chelsea Tanner. That's me. All these clips are part of longer and more in-depth courses now available on the Tonebase Flute premium platform. Let's dive in.
And then we can start talking about angling, right? So if we want our fullest, richest, do you want to demonstrate when I say
Sure.
a few things? If we really want to fill as much of the partial system as we can, and even for our loudest playing, we're going to go first octave in particular, we're going to go straight down, boom, right into that flute, not eating it, but right into it. Absolutely. And if we want to play that softly, we're going to change the angle. But let's demonstrate at that angle what happens if we play softly. Same angle as the bigger playing. So how about if we change the angle to about a 45-degree angle and you blow there. Yes, the great Thomas Nyfinger, former flute professor at Yale University, used to talk about a 90-degree and 45-degree angle shift for the air. And we don't need much more than that. We really do not. I mean, we see flutists a lot of the time looking up, and I think, A, what's so interesting up there? I want to know too. And B, how do they expect to get a sound if they're envisioning blowing there? Because that's upside down, right? We can't blow that high. If we think like a protractor, from math class, sorry if I'm scarring anybody, but we all had them, those protractors. What we would do with them is open them up. But what I want you to remember is that this is a tiny angle that creates a large angle. We don't really need to create this part of the angle, the most open part. We just want to split the air at this part of the angle right here and let the air shoot there. By blowing at a 45-degree angle, I am splitting my air further on top of this hole, which makes it faster, which is going to send it farther.
Mm-hmm. Another thing that I think is important to think about logistically, why we don't drop our heads when going into the first octave, even though it's a bit intuitive for some reason to do that, is because usually our flute will roll in. Mm-hmm. We cover more of the embouchure hole, and not only does that create a covered sound, but it also makes this smaller, which is actually what we want when we want the air to move faster. So cracking might happen a lot in the first octave if your head is down like this.
Right. And then we're going to start muscling it, right? We're going to start willing that sound to come out. So in order to blow at that 45-degree angle, I do need to allow my setup to come a little bit forward, right? And so this is where, I don't know what you think about this, Chelsea, but I love to lead with the corners rather than with the center. I like to think of the like you say, use the word pucker. So this coming forward, but I bring the corners along for the ride so that I'm not disengaging parts of my mouth. So when I do this, what else comes along? My tongue. My tongue will urge forward, and I can actually use my tongue to help support the air, right? If the front of the tongue is low and back in the mouth and the air is coming over the slide, that's an opportunity for the air to slow down before it comes through the lips. Conversely, if I urge the tongue forward, that air is going to ride that wave all the way out of the mouth. So you've got, to some degree, corners, center, tongue, angle.
In the first octave, we want the air to be able to drop into the instrument. And maybe that means that we don't blow quite the highest volume, but in allowing the air to drop into the instrument, we are actually achieving the greatest amount of acoustical vibration in the lowest notes. So in this example, I'm actually producing a decent amount of tone, but with a little lower volume of air, and I'm kind of letting the air drop into the instrument. So they're achieving kind of a nice focused mezzo forte-ish dense sound by allowing the air to drop into the instrument. So I'm slowing the air down, partially by having a little larger embouchure aperture. And the air is dropping in because my jaw position is really quite slack, and you can see that my posture and head position are good. As we ascend on the instrument through the top of the staff, there are some significant changes that happen acoustically that may require us to speed up the air column because we're really starting to play partials from those lower notes. So I would say, in general, the notes above the staff require a higher air speed all the way up through the rest of the instrument, and the notes in the staff require a lower airspeed, and that's the simplification. So in the following area, I'm actually still sort of in the lower register mode, even though the notes are a little higher. I'm focusing these notes by using the same technique that I was basically using for the lower notes. And you can see that if I start to increase volume and velocity in those notes, they start to become a little bit windy and lose tone. So there I'm starting to play those notes as if they belong to the higher set, and they actually have a little bit less tone, even though I'm using more air. So that's kind of interesting. But as we are climbing above the staff, we pretty quickly want to ramp up the volume and velocity of the air, mostly the velocity, because that is what is allowing us to produce the higher partials. That is, in this case, the higher note with the same fingering as the lower note. So when I cross above the staff, there's actually quite a distinct change in the way I'm playing the notes. Now here, I'm actually starting to blow the air quite a bit harder, and it's moving faster already, as if I am playing already in the higher register. The main way that I'm doing that is by using a little bit smaller embouchure aperture in order to do that. And I think the air is going up a little bit. It's not going down into the instrument as much as it was.
So another thing I think is really important, a fundamental thing, is keeping the flute loose on your face. Now this is somewhat controversial, so I want to explain why I think this is really important. When we're playing the flute, we want the air to be traveling a long distance. This is in keeping with the idea that air moves kind of like soup. We just can't see it. And the same theory that keeps an airplane in the air currents, can help with getting more air into the flute. So when we're playing low notes, for instance, we need the air to be at a certain speed. And if it goes too fast, the flute, of course, leaps up into a different register. But when we want to play loud, we want a lot of air to go into the flute. So especially when we're talking about low notes in the flute and we want volume, we want a lot of air to go into the flute, but we can't blow faster because then the sound would shift up to a different register. So this idea of air currents is particularly relevant for playing loud in the low register. And I would like to demonstrate with a breathing bag to show you the difference that the distance can make. So this is a bag that I use for breathing exercises. And I'm first going to blow it up, blowing directly onto the tube, so you can see that this is really about the best I can do at this moment. So that's my air today. Now I'm going to turn on sideways, and I'm going to hold my fingers out here to check that I'm actually blowing into the bag. And hopefully you'll see that the bag fills up much faster than it did when I was blowing directly into it. I have a lot more air left over, actually. So, the flute being loose on your chin is a way of ensuring that the funnel you're blowing through, that your lips are forming, that funnel is as long as it can be. Now, obviously, you need the flute to be steady, so there has to be some contact here. But if you are pushing the flute a lot on your face, then this is going to get flattened out, and that funnel can't be as long as it would be, ideally. So that's the main reason for thinking about your flute being loose on your face. It's also true that sometimes people don't treat their transmandibular joint, where your jaw meets your skull, very kindly. Sometimes people get in the habit of moving their jaw forward when they play a lot, and sometimes even pulling it back a lot. And both of those things aren't very good for this joint. We need to sort of imagine that this is a hinge. So a normal motion would be closing and opening, which is kind of on an arc, going with my chin going back down towards my collarbone. So we also have a fair bit of motion sideways. It's all chewing motion. But I think sometimes just the way we pick up a flute and start playing it, people can develop, bad positions, which is not to say you can't change that, but it takes some thought. So I'd like to talk a little bit more about finding a good position for your jaw. I think the easiest way to do this is to take the head joint off the flute and to line yourself up in front of a mirror so you can experiment with this. I'd like to explain that we're looking for a particular angle of the air going into the flute. And some people's face shape might mean that the head joint has to sit in a different spot to the next person. So if I hold my hand out in front of my face like this, you can see I've got my thumb underneath my chin, and I'm doing a flute aperture. If I blow up my hand, my angle is quite steep. It blows somewhere down in this part of my hand. So it's kind of like the air is coming out like this. For another person, the air angle might be quite horizontal. It might be hitting in the middle of their hand, meaning the air is really coming out straight. The air angle really is going to dictate what angle the head joint is on, because we're looking for a 45-degree angle, roughly, into the embouchure wall. So if this hand is the embouchure wall I'm blowing at, I want my air to be on this sort of angle. If my air is coming out horizontal, then I kind of have to tilt the head joint in to get the most satisfying sound easily.
One thing people always tend to be curious about is how to get rid of that airy sound in the tone. We want a full and resonant tone, right? Full sound, and that doesn't have any sort of air or unfocused quality to it. So one thing to keep in mind is if your aperture is just a bit too wide and the air isn't just going directly into the instrument, it's not as efficient and focused, meaning this way as well as this way, right? We want to focus it to the point of the center of the outer edge of the embouchure hole. So if I am a little bit too wide in my aperture, it might sound something like this. And I'm blowing a little bit above the tone hole as well. We want to make sure that the angle is at the outer edge, meaning into the flute. We don't want to just blow across it like we would at like a pop or soda bottle. So I'm blowing a little bit more down into the flute. You can hear where I changed and made my aperture a bit wider and aimed up. So maybe we want to aim up for a different note, but for that one in particular, right, we need to find the angle of the air that works best. We also want to do this without creating a lot of tension in the mouth, right? So I always like to think about puckering instead of being really tense in the lips. So if my lips don't feel soft and puckered and they're tense, the sound is going to sound tense. Same with the rest of our body. If we're tense, our sound, we're going to be able to hear it in our sound. So notice that that makes the pitch go sharp when we do that, and it makes the tone quality quite airy. So if you're trying to eliminate that airy sound, I really advise puckering, making sure that this is not tense and that you're aiming the direction of your air a little bit more into the instrument.